The Baki vs Kengan Ashura film is out, and I wanted to give my impressions of the film after of course watching it myself, because if you're a Baki or Kengan fan, you're probably going to see this film no matter what. However, the question is whether or not the film itself is good, and I'm gonna give my 2 cents on the quality of the film. But if you're worried about spoilers, I'll actually try to keep this as spoiler free as I can. I'll only really talk about stuff that has been in the promotional images and what we already know about the film prior to, of course, watching the film itself. The basic outline of the plot is that the Kengan Association and the underground arena in Baki have basically started a competition between one another to where they're going to pick 3 fighters to go up against one another. Think of a similar format to, let's say, Star Strike It Rich, but also if you read Kengan Omega, Kengan vs Purgatory. That's the type of setup we're working with here, kind of, with the confirmed matches being Swapang vs Hanayama, Jack versus Ryan, and of course the main event, the thing that everyone wants to see, Baki versus Oma. And so most of the film actually just revolves around this, and it's a pretty straightforward plot, all things considered, and it makes the most amount of sense. One of the things I did like about the film was the at least attempt to integrate the Kengan-verse and the Baki-verse, basically. And so in this film, the Kengan-verse and the Baki-verse are one and the same, and so there's a lot of overlap between the verses, specifically with characters knowing each other from Baki across to the Kengan verse. And so I thought that that was a nice touch to the film, at least when it comes to selling the idea that both verses are actually, you know, the same verse somehow. But one of the things I did want to talk about first and foremost is of course the length and pacing of the film itself. The film is 1 hour, but that's also including credits. The film itself is, I would say, 50 minutes tops. And considering it has an opening, it's probably a little bit lower than 50 minutes. So this is going to be a very short film, all things considered, and I think most people knew that because the length of the film was released. But how does this affect the pacing of the film itself? Well, it does unfortunately have the result of a lot of things getting, let's say, rushed, Luckily, the things that get rushed aren't necessarily important things. I think the fights themselves get quite a bit of breathing room, and that's good considering everyone is here for the fights primarily, but everything else is, well, pretty fast. And so if you had the hope that we were going to get, of course, these long and fleshed out interactions between the characters from the Kengan verse to the Baki verse, don't keep your hopes high as far as that's concerned. Think of it as like fan service one-off interactions that you're probably going to see most of the time. Some had a few more moments that I found quite funny and cool, but again, don't expect much when it comes to that. Which brings us to the fights. And unfortunately, I can't really bring up the fights without talking about the animation, because the animation art style is actually in the 2D Baki style of animation, which I think most people prefer over the Kengan Ashura 3D stuff. But the Baki anime isn't really something that you watch because of how good the animation is. Not to say that the animation is particularly bad, it's just there are studios that could probably do the animation better. Let's just say that. The only reason I'm really bringing this up is because this is a film and I don't really keep up with the Baki anime that much. The last I watched the anime was actually during the Muhammad Ali Jr. arc, and the animation to me seems kind of similar to that. Maybe some people that watch the Baki anime regularly can tell me if this is a higher quality than normal, because there was that expectation because it's a film we might get higher quality animation. But there's definitely some reusing of scenes here and there, and if you've watched the Baki anime, it uses of course similar techniques to, let's say, the Baki anime. But animation aside, the fights themselves, I think they were pretty well written, I would say. Especially the one fight that I didn't expect to be as good as it ended up being, and that is Soapang versus Hanayama. That is actually my favorite fight in the movie, funny enough. Mainly because my expectations for it weren't nearly as high as for the other two. It isn't to say the other two fights are not good, but I was pleasantly surprised by Soapang versus Hanayama. But the other fights as well, they were pretty good in their own right. And so I think they're probably going to be enjoyable for most people, let's say. Which brings me to some of the bigger, let's say, I'm gonna call them plot twists, kind of, but I won't spoil what they are. Because there are certain events in this film that I think have a double-edged sword to them, because there were some really hype moments, especially towards the end of the film, that ultimately go nowhere, which left a pretty bittersweet taste in my mouth when it came to this film. My guess is that I'll probably, and to be honest, unless there's like, let's say, a sequel to this film, which they probably won't be, that bittersweet feeling will stay, of course, until forever. And I think it's a bit tragic that a few things in this film, although probably for fan service and stuff like that, are really just left up in the air, incomplete. And it might be that they're of course baiting for a sequel, or maybe even, look, I'll take a sequel manga, I don't care at this point. I just want closure on that. But all in all, we have a pretty mixed result in terms of this film, if I'm gonna be honest, of course. On the one hand, I think the fights are good. On the other hand, I think there are a lot of, let's say, missed opportunities, and unfortunately, it was probably doomed to be this way because, of course, it's literally like, again, it's like a 50-minute film, and so they had to do so much with the little time that they had. But my biggest issue is that maybe they could have slimmed down on a few things, which of course they did, because like most of the Kengan roster, like characters that you would think would be in the film, are not in the film. And so there was definitely a lot of things that got cut out, but even the stuff that did make it, I think more could have been done, or at the very least they should have cut down a bit more and have those few interactions be a lot more fleshed out. And so I am sort of seeing this from a sort of glass half full and glass half empty, mentality. Because on the one hand, I do like the film. On the other hand, I do think half of it is like, oh my god, why wasn't there more? And so if you've made it this far into the video, hey, props to you. But if you haven't watched the film, I would say temper your expectations a bit, because there will be hype moments, there will be high points, but not the entire film is not like that. And it's a bit unfortunate that that's the case. That's my impression of the film itself. It's pretty good, but it could have been better, let's say. But yeah, if you like Kengan content, you can subscribe to my channel, and until next time, take it easy.